those who are arrogant and proud, since God is a God of knowledge who weighs human actions. Inherent within these verses is the idea that no one has the right to boast or be arrogant, since God pays attention to human circumstances, judges them, and sets them in balance when necessary. Even though the song never identifies Peninnah per se, her taunting and ridicule of Hannah come to mind in these verses, see 1:6. L4-8. These verses logically flow from the previous statements about God's ability to change the fortunes of the mighty and the lowly. They provide a specific catalog of reversals brought about by God's own power. Verse 4 centers on the powerful who have been brought low, the bows of the mighty are broken, JPS, NRSV, and then, V4b, shifts to the weak who have been made strong, the feeble gird on strength, NRSV. Verse 5 continues the series of comparisons by referring to those who were full and then hired themselves for bread, and those who were hungry are fat with spoil, NRSV. Verse 5b reverses the order by referring to the weak first and then the mighty. In this instance, the woman who was barren has borne 7, and she who has many children is forlorn, NRSV. Verses 4-5 especially echo God's intervention in the life of Hannah, who was barren but later given several children. Verses 6-8 recall that it is God who is the power behind these reversals of fortune. The focus shifts from the hope of those in need of God's help to a doxology of praise to God, Birch 1998, 981. Unlike V1, which highlights the role of the supplicant, VV 6-8 magnify the power and activity of God. These verses confirm that it is God who kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up, makes poor and makes rich, brings low and exalts, raises up the poor, lifts the needy, to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor, NRSV. The writer can state this theological belief because the pillars of the earth are Yahweh's, and on them he has set the world, V8b NRSV. In essence, the voice in this psalm underscores the notion of God as creator, the one who has established the earth and set it in place. Since God demonstrated both the ability and the might to accomplish this amazing feat at creation, the writer is reassured that God also has the power to intervene in a time of need. 1 Samuel 2:1-8. L9-10. The last two verses of the song flow out of the preceding section. The God who is able to change the fortunes of the powerful and the weak, V9, is also the God who distinguishes between the faithful and the wicked and judges the ends of the earth, V10. God will guard the feet of his faithful while the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, V9 NRSV. The poem underscores the notion that it is not by one's own power or might that a person prevails, but it is God's power that transforms the social realities in which one lives. Thus, the faithful are those who put their faith in God's power and allow him to work in their personal situations. Because of this certitude, the writer of this song can confidently proclaim that God will shatter his enemies and give victory to his people. In the context of this psalm, the writer in V10 specifically identifies his king as the one who will receive this power, who is also called his anointed. Interestingly, the poem that begins as Hannah's personal prayer ends with a statement about Israel's king. The poem essentially anticipates the eventual arrival of a king, and Hannah's son would play an integral role in anointing Israel's first king and establishing the political office of the monarchy in Israel's society. V. From the text. 1 Hannah's song is instructive to modern believers at various levels. First, Hannah's song is a reaction of thanksgiving and praise in light of the miraculous way God worked on her behalf. Hannah was mindful to thank God both in her actions, by presenting Samuel as an offering to God, and in her words of celebratory song. As a recipient of God's grace, Hannah did not forget to show her gratitude in her excitement over Samuel's birth, but she remembered the one to whom she owed so much. Hannah's reaction is very different from the Israelites who wandered in the desert for many years. The generation who witnessed God's miraculous power and experienced liberation from Egyptian bondage forgot what God had done for them during the intervening years between the Exodus and settlement. As a result, that generation became known as ingrates and complainers who forfeited the blessings of the promised land because of their ingratitude, PS 78. In the NT, Luke reminds the reading audience of the 10 lepers who were made whole, but only one returned to worship and thank Jesus for the healing he provided. 17:11-19. The Bible reinforces the notion that gratitude is a noble quality that should be evident within the life of every believer. Through gratitude, we proclaim our thankfulness to God for the way he has worked in our situations, and we acknowledge that we had to depend upon him for his help and strength. Gratitude should also be extended at a human level. It is important that we show our appreciation to friends, neighbors, family members, co-workers, members of the community of faith, and even strangers for the help, thoughtfulness, and care they displayed toward us. In doing so, we demonstrate that we did 1 Samuel 2:9-10. Not take their acts of kindness for granted, and we affirm the significant impact they made on us. 2. The melody of Hannah is echoed in the Song of Mary in the NT, Luke 1:46-55, see also Commentary on 1 Sam 2:26. As both of these songs attest, God was able to work in seemingly impossible circumstances to bring about the birth of a special son. In the cases of Hannah and Mary, the child born to these mothers would have a profound role in transforming the religious situations into which they arrived. Samuel became the faithful prophet/priest/judge of the people of Israel, through whom God purified the corrupted sanctuary. At Shiloh, Jesus, who embodied the very being of God, humbly entered the world to purify the human race of sin and disobedience. It is significant that God did not select the most notable women to mother these significant sons, but the lowly and barren, the kind of women most people would overlook as insignificant. In the examples of Hannah and Mary, we are powerfully reminded that in terms of salvation history, God often works in paradoxes. God does not always seek out the most powerful, wealthy, or popular individuals to effect his salvific purposes in the world. Rather, he often works in and through unlikely circumstances and the unsuspecting individuals to bring his purposes to fruition. 3. In the Song of Hannah we are reminded that life is subject to change, and God is able to reverse the fortunes of both the feeble and the strong. As the life of Hannah illustrates, God can exalt the lowly as well as bring healing and happiness to the one experiencing pain. God can also humble the arrogant and lay low the powerful. The Song of Hannah is instructive on this point, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. 2:3 NRSV. God is acutely aware of the actions of humans on earth, and he dispenses his justice and mercy where appropriate. As part his plan, God has also endowed people, institutions, and nations to be agents of his justice and mercy in the world. God is at work through a variety of means to provide aid and comfort for the weak, the sorrowful, the hungry, the destitute, and the vulnerable. God also works through various organizations and institutions to make sure that those who commit injustice and exploit the pain and suffering of others are punished. In light of this, it is our calling and obligation as Christ's representatives to be instruments by which God enacts change in the lives of people and society. See Eli and his sons, 2:12-3:1a. Behind the text. This unit centers on the activity of Eli and his sons at the Shiloh sanctuary. It is clear that the primary function of this text is to draw a sharp contrast or distinction between Eli's corrupt sons and the faithful prophet/priest Samuel. Indeed, the entire unit draws attention to this fact by referring to the sons of Eli as worthless sons, v12a, at the very beginning of this section. 1 Samuel 2:12-3:1a. Hebrew phrase used to describe the sons, b5ne and lt b5l and l4, al, is very similar to the statement reiterated by Hannah in 1:16a, in which she implored Eli not to take her for a worthless woman, bat b5l and l4, al. The wordplay on these texts is intentional, and thus the writer/narrator is deliberate in creating a sharp dichotomy between the posterity of the two families. Hannah's son, Samuel, would be good, and Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were wicked. The deceitfulness of the priesthood is painfully evident in the actions of Hophni and Phinehas and those who officiated over the religious ceremonies with them at Shiloh. Not only did Eli's sons pervert and manipulate the sacrificial process for their own gain, VV 13-17, but they also engaged in sexual activity within the sanctuary's precincts, VV 22-26. The notice about the son's sexual activity is troubling for a couple of reasons. First, the syntax employed in V22, the verb s of 4 cav plus, et, is similar to other places in the OT that refer to rape, Gen 34:2, 7, 2 Sam 13:14, or other forms of sexual abuse. Second, the type of sensual activity that took place at the sacred site also smacks of Canaanite fertility practices. It becomes apparent in this section that the Canaanization of Israel's society, beginning with the period of the Judges, had even permeated the most sacred spheres of life. The narrator, at the same time, strategically alludes to Samuel's piety among these uncomplimentary reports. About Eli's sons, VV 18, 21b, 3:1, so that the reader is consistently reminded of Samuel's goodness and faithfulness to Yahweh and the abject failure and despicability of the Iliad priesthood. The favorable allusions to Samuel, however, remind the reader that a change in the religious status quo is imminent. These intermittent reports function to provide an alternative to the picture of doom surrounding the house of Eli. Thus, Samuel, in a sense, is legitimate in the eyes of the narrator while Eli's household is soundly rejected. The scandals and sexual impropriety of the priesthood at Shiloh were met with a harsh word of denunciation from an anonymous man of God, VV 27-36. The unnamed prophet delivered a scathing judgment on Eli's household, which climaxed with the announcement that Eli's family line would come to an abrupt end. From a literary and narrative standpoint, the inclusion of this section is designed to prepare the reader for the eventual downfall of Eli's priestly line. It not only provides a theological justification for the eradication of the Iliad priesthood but also prepares the way for Samuel to emerge as Israel's main prophet/priest in Israelite society. In the text, 1 Eli's sons in action, 2:12-26. L 12-21. In addition to being called worthless, the text notes that Eli's sons did not know Yahweh, v 12. The Hebrew term used here, Yaforda, can denote intimate knowledge of an individual or even God. It is evident from their actions that Hophni and Phinehas neither knew Yahweh nor revered him. 1 Samuel 2:12-21. Verses 13-17 give clear evidence of this by providing a summary statement regarding their inappropriate activity at the shrine. This section starts with a notice detailing the acceptable and/or customary manner of the priests, v13, who officiated at the site. According to priestly code of conduct, when the worshipper came to the sanctuary, the meat that was offered would be boiled first, and then the attendant of the priests would take a 3-pronged fork and stick it in the pot or the jar or the cauldron in which the meat was being prepared. At that point, whatever the fork brought up would be regarded as the priest's portion to consume. This routine was considered acceptable, because it emphasized the role of the divine in determining which portion would fall to the priests, all that the fork brought up, v14 NRSV, and it ensured that the fatty or premier portions of the meat would be consumed as an offering to Yahweh first. Eli's sons severely breached the sacred elements of this protocol, however. At Shiloh, the attendant, who is unnamed in the text yet operated on behalf of Hophni and Phinehas, literally threatened the worshippers to hand over the meat. If the worshipper refused to give the meat to the attendant, he would take the meat from the worshipper's hands by force. The purloining of the sacrificial meat thus took place before the fatty and premier portions of the animal could be completely cooked. Moreover, the priests picked the best portions of the animal for themselves to be roasted and not boiled. Thus, the sacrificial animal became the priest's personal meal instead of a sacrifice reserved for Yahweh. This behavior was not only contemptible in the eyes of the people, but it disregarded acceptable practices according to priestly law. Lef 7:23-25, 31, 17:6. These actions also pointed to the fundamental avarice of the priests as they showed contempt for Yahweh's offering. It is not surprising then that the narrator points out that the actions of these young men constituted a very great sin before the Lord, v. 17. In essence, they treated Yahweh and Yahweh's offering with contempt. The scandalous actions of the priesthood are immediately juxtaposed with a favorable report about young Samuel in VV 18-21. Whereas Eli's sons despised the Lord's sacrifice, Samuel, who himself represented a living sacrifice, ministered faithfully before Yahweh, v. 18a. The verb in v. 18a, as in 2:11b, is a participle, me 5s of 4 re 4t, which indicates ongoing or uninterrupted service to the Lord. According to the text, Samuel ministered by wearing a linen ephod along with the robe his mother brought him, v. 19. The ephod represented an important part of priestly apparel. It was probably a short skirt or apron bound around the waist, Mach line 1971, 52. Although Samuel was not the main priest at Shiloh and we do not hear of any priestly functions he carried out at this point in the narrative, his role as a priest is anticipated by the ephod he wore. Samuel would serve a priestly role later, especially as it related to his responsibility in offering sacrifices, 7:9. 1 Samuel 2:12-21. The favorable impression of Samuel is solidified further with the closing statement in v21b, which states, "The young boy Samuel grew up in the presence of Yahweh." The text reinforces the dichotomy between Samuel and Eli's sons through the use of a wordplay in this statement. The verb used to describe Samuel's growing up and maturation, ga dal, before God, vv 21:26, is similar to the adjective used to identify the sins of Eli's sons in v17, ita for law equals. Thus, it becomes evident that while Eli's sons moved further away from God, Samuel continued to remain close/faithful to Yahweh, even growing up in his presence. Here the reader is reminded once again of Samuel's piety in the face of ongoing priestly decadence. L 22-26. The favorable statement about Samuel in v21 is immediately followed by this section that highlights the malfeasance of Eli's sons. According to the text, Hophni and Phinehas were laying with the women who were standing at the opening of the tent of meeting, v 22. Eli heard about his sons' actions from the reports of all the people of Israel, and he later condemned their escapades as evil deeds. He warned them that sins against another person could be mediated, but if they sinned against God, no other higher authority could intercede for them, Klein 1983, 26. The reference to the women who served at the site appears to recall Exodus 38:8, which also alludes to women who performed menial duties at a sacred site, the tent of meeting. As mentioned above, see behind the text, the language and syntax used to describe the actions of Hophni and Phinehas in relationship to the women speaks to the illegitimate nature of these encounters. The grammar of v22 leaves open the possibility of a couple different interpretive options. First, the language may indicate that Eli's sons forced themselves upon the women, such as in the case of molestation or rape. If this is what is meant, then it underscores the wickedness of the sons and their penchant to abuse their power and position. In this case, the women would be seen as victims not only of their lustful intentions but of their ecclesiastical authority as well. Second, it is also possible that the noted sexual